Rows a little different, Mr. S.
Good morning. We'd like to call the January 29th, 2022 special called meeting for the Rutherford County School Board to order. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Coy Young. Thank you, Mr. Young. It's not on the agenda, but I invite everybody to join me for a moment of silence this morning. Thank you. Okay. Members of the board, I would like to remind you that Ms. Bratton is joining us electronically this morning. Please remember to speak into your microphones. She can only hear us and the staff and everybody if we're speaking into the microphones. And Ms. Sharp is on her way. She is slightly delayed, but she will be joining us. The first item.
All right, the existing school zone, student numbers by school zone and school enrollment. If you want to do access the GIS map, can you do it up here, project it over here? Or can you project it from, okay. And that way go over the zones and then you already have the numbers and stuff and the growth, correct?
Did you want to cover all the schools, or?
I would just kind of go break it down by, like we sent the GIS map to them to go elementary, show the zones by grade band, and then just simply pivot from that to this.
Yes, sir. That's good. That's good, John. If you just start on the elementary, please. So, what I did was took the
John, the bottom, move that.
the membership for the first month for the last 5 years and broke them down into subgroups based on the grade band, and came up with a list of all the schools and the growth rate between each year and a projected growth rate for next year. So, I'm just going to go alphabetically and kind of list them, and if you have a question, please stop me. So Barfield Elementary School, as you know, we had a rezoning that happened because of Plainview. Their growth rate before that had kind of been in decline. They grew because of the rezoning for Plainview. They grew 17% last year. Remember that when we do that rezoning, growth is going to be instantaneous. We don't really know what the next year is going to be unless we just use the district average. So we're looking at somewhere around 900 for next year. Blackman Elementary School maintained a pretty significant growth. They jumped actually the year before last until this year by 11%. So they were at 5% growth. They jumped to 11.
Can I jump in real quick on going back on the Barfield? Obviously, Barfield was impacted when Salem opened up, and that caused a little bit of decline. And then when we rezone out, when we look at Barfield, it's kind of limited as far currently as the zone in which it's in. It's kind of limited as far as any kind of build outs.
Yeah, we have a little bit of inventory that'll probably be coming up along Veterans Parkway, but for the most part, I think that area is starting to slow to move. It was very quick, and it doesn't seem to be, the build out doesn't seem to be happening quite as fast as it did maybe 2 years ago, just for that specific area.
As opposed to Blackman Elementary, where we do not have a very close city school, elementary school close by.
Absolutely. And we also have a larger pocket of multifamily home solutions in the Blackman area. That would definitely account for that too. Brown's Chapel did do a little increase over the last several years. Now we have a couple of brand new subdivisions in there, and they are bringing small children with them. So their growth for this last year was around 16%, and we project them to be right at around 800 for next year. Buchanan Elementary School was also in the rezoning for Plainview. They did take a drop of about 10%, but we expect them to kind of recover pretty quick from that. Their build out for next year should be somewhere around 470. Cedar Grove took a dive for a couple of years, but has bounced back, and they grew about 8% from last year to this year. And we're looking at about 820 maybe for them next year. Christiana Elementary has seen some decrease over the years. Of course, their biggest decrease in this last go-around, again, was Plainview. And they are sitting right at about 630 for next year. David Urey has seen a little bit of increase over the last year, and they look to be about 750 for next. John Coleman has seen a recent increase as well of about 4%. That's not too far out of the norm. The year before they had taken a little bit of a dive down to negative 8%, but they've jumped back up, and we're looking at about 530 for them next year. Kittrell just seems to be kind of flatlined. They grew by 2% last year, but it really wasn't much of anything. 2% in 800 kids is not that much. Kittrell seems to be about the same. They kind of ebb and flow. They go up and down just a little bit every year, but they maintain a consistent enrollment. Las Casas has seen some growth over the last year. There is some building going on in that area, but not significantly. Laverne Lake. Laverne Lake has also stayed pretty consistent. They're not moving one way or another, but they look to be about 900 next year. Of course, Laverne Primary closed, and they were picked up by Roy Waldron, so those numbers, when we get down to that, they will be intermixed with those. So you're going to see a significant drop or a raise, but that's the reason in that 2 years. Plainview, we see them on track to gain their normal 4%. They should be somewhere around 440 next year. Rock Springs Elementary School has picked up significantly over the last year. There's a lot of buildings still going on in the Lee Road area, and Trey, you might be able to kind of speak to that a little bit more.
Well, we'll also get the new subdivision at the Gwynn Farm at the end of Waldron Road, and then there's a proposed 600 houses right across the street.
Yeah.
So it's going to continue for a while.
Yeah.
What do you have the capacity at with that annex for Rock Springs Elementary?
$1,411.
I think we got. I think we didn't.
$1,174.
I don't think we worked together on that one. You got what now?
1,411 is the capacity.
1411 for Rock Springs Elementary.
Yes, sir.
And you're projecting their next year's enrollment to be what?
If you use a 5% growth rate, you're looking at somewhere around 1233.
Okay.
They're at 1174 now.
Okay.
That 5% is very aggressive, but it's you you can't, when you're looking at the district right now was right at 3% based on the numbers that we have on this. We try to be a little bit more aggressive so that we can plan for the unknowns, especially in areas that are growing faster than other areas. And basically, we know the whole north and the west side of the county is growing the fastest. So each one has been projected on its own, and as you can see down at the bottom as a district.
Mr. Morgan, may I ask you then, 5%, is that what we're going to use for the northern end Laverne area with all that high growth? Is a 5% growth rate what we're going to use?
For me, it was a baseline to start with. We can adjust it moving forward from this date, but we needed to kind of have one consistent figure to start from.
Got it.
5% has been a good figure to use over the last several years to accommodate for different areas of the county that we kind of can't wholly see until we play it out.
Yeah.
Typically, basically we have 3 areas in our county that are fastest growing. You got the Stewart's Creek area, you have the Blackman area, and you have the Rockville area. Those are the 3 systems. When he shows this heat map later on, that you'll be able to discern that's where the greatest growth is occurring. Of course, it's not. That's not anything we didn't already know. Just looking at census data.
Right.
Thank you.
So as you can imagine, Rockville Elementary is, part of that whole thing too. Now, the one thing that I don't understand, and you might be able to enlighten us a little bit on that. There was a 16% decrease at Rockville Elementary School, but we do have an expansion online, and I wholly expect for that to fill up from everything that's going on in that area.
How many did we rezone to Plainview? A big bulk came?
Yeah, it was over probably close to 200 we rezoned from Rockville to Barfield. That's why Barfield jumped.
Rocky Fork Elementary has seen a pretty good increase. They were at 10% the last 2 years, and we look to them to be about 990. Roy Waldron was what I was mentioning a minute ago. The last count that we got was 1225. They're at about 7%, and we're looking at about almost 1,300 for them next year. Smyrna Elementary School has kind of increased a little bit. They were on the downswing for several years, but they seem to be kind of coming back to a norm, or again, kind of that flatline place. And we look to them to be about 700. Smyrna Primary School, again, has somewhat flatlined. They rose up to 5% this year, which was, a pretty good increase for them over the course of 1 year, since they had been, again, on the downswing for several. And they're going to be right around 600. Stewart's Creek Elementary, as we know, that area is booming pretty big. We had a 13% increase the last year, and they should be about somewhere around 1,200 next year. Stewartsboro is also on a big increase, but the reason that it is because we made some modifications to Thurman Francis program, and they took in all those kids that already lived near the Stewart's Creek School that was rezoned from Thurman Francis. And we took I think they changed it from an all magnet
we went from
split to all.
Yeah, we went from traditional and choice to all choice at Thurman Francis.
So they're definitely on line to hold their student body of about 680 next year. And then Walter Hill, we had a significant increase, but we had a rezoning between Walter Hill and Wilson within the last couple of years. So they're still trying to get used to that, and they rose 13%. The first year was 41%, but that was definitely because of the rezoning. The 13%, we've had some growth in that area and some kids that have actually chose to be at that school. And then Wilson also had a slight increase.
Can we stop on that Walter Hill again? The biggest challenges with Walter Hill is that sewer only comes so far. Is that not correct?
Yes, sir, we're on a private pump station, and we've got a limited size line there that goes under the river back almost to Siegel.
So to say that if they ever do expand that, do you see that happening with the?
I don't know that TDEC will allow the city to take sewer under the river, and it would be extremely, extremely expensive for us now to try and replace that line with another size, and I'm not real sure that TDEC would even allow it today.
So that may stunt some of the growth. We're going to have growth out there, but it's not going to grow like the other areas that have these utilities already in place.
I would not think so.
Okay, so just keep that in mind, board.
John, can we change to the middle schools, please?
Mr. Morgan,
Yes, ma'am.
could you tell me the enrollment at Walter Hill at the present time?
Mr.
540.
Does that sound
Okay,
right?
and what,
It's $595, Ms. Bratton.
We kind
thank
of.
you.
I tell you what, since you got the updated enrollment numbers, anytime enrollment is asked, you want to.
Shane's enrollment numbers are about 2
Based on
weeks
the
earlier than mine.
I think you based yours on the first part of the year.
I must have the wrong sheet because I updated that to make sure that our numbers were reflected the same. Used the same, I updated mine for the same date, but I
Oh, I'm
must have
sorry,
brought this-
I'm sorry. That is capacity. I looked at the wrong, it's 540. 540.
Okay.
You're right. I looked at the capacity line.
Thanks.
540, but capacity is 595.
That was a quick
said-
fill up right there.
Yeah, could we
Do
get
we
a
have a
hard copy of all
that?
that?
Yes, ma'am, you can.
And what are the numbers at Wilson Elementary? You may have said them, and I just missed them. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Wilson is right now at 666.
The sheet that I sent y'all yesterday, it had 4 files. One of the files is the sheet that has capacity, number of portables, whether it's over or under. I added 2 columns at Mr. Young's request, the percent capacity that we presently are, and then the actual number that we would be at 110%. So I sent this out yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't print that out. If we could get a hard copy of that for everybody, I think.
Sure.
I've got a quick, they're moving Jefferson Pike all the way to 840 right now. They're working on that.
That is correct.
What zone does that affect, or what school does that affect? Wilson or?
That's John Coleman on
John
that
Coleman,
side, on that side of 840.
I was just curious because I would say that area will probably build up.
There is some plans, Smyrna Ready Mix and the Hollingsheads have some of that property around their new office building, and they do have a PRD that's been approved by the city of Smyrna already, and it's basically condos and multifamily type stuff, so there will be some growth there.
The good thing is, though, is John Coleman has much capacity.
Okay, I wasn't sure of that zone.
840 is kind of the dividing line between Wilson and John Coleman.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So on to middle schools. So we have Blackman Middle School that saw about 6% growth over the last year, and we're looking at them about 1,700 for next. Christiana Middle also saw.
Can I jump in there? I don't want to interrupt you, but some of the things that he's telling you is potentially correct, but there's this thing called 6th grade, okay? And a lot of times they go to the city, so we don't really know. So it could be exactly what he says, or it could be a little bit lower.
The other thing to consider too is their incoming 6th grade. We really don't know what we're going to get for that.
Right.
We know we're going to get all the 7th grade.
Right.
We really don't know what we're going to get for 6th grade. So Christiana Middle School saw about an 8% growth over the last year. and they've been steady before that. We're looking at about 1,100 from them. Eagleville right now as a school, we'll just hit that real fast. As a school, they have a pretty consistent flat. This year they started at they are at $8.99 now, and we look to them with a generous growth to be about $9.40. I don't perceive them, or I don't see them actually making it to that. Laverne Middle School declined just a little bit. They were flat for a while, but they've declined. They should be somewhere around 1,200 next year. Oakland Middle School has set back just a little bit. They're at 1069 now. We're looking at about 1120 for next year. Rock Springs Middle, they're pretty flat. They're at 1020 now. Rockvale Middle has increased sharply over the last year. They're at 1385, and we're looking at about 1450 for next year. Rocky Fork Middle, they had an increase of about 8%, and they're at 783 now, and we look to about 820 for next. Siegel Middle School actually took a dive the year before last, but then recovered that exact same amount. So they're at around 1160 now, and we look for them to be about 1215 next year.
That was probably due to that rezoning tweak that we did with
For
Oakland
the
Middle.
downtown, yeah, we had just finished a 3-year phase
I think it was,
for middle
was
school.
it on, what road, was it on Rutherford Boulevard that we went back in there off of Rutherford?
It was down, yes, on Rutherford,
Rutherford, yeah,
and maybe Clark.
it was.
Clark, yeah. Smyrna Middle School, they were dead even last year. They're at just at 1,000 now, 956. And Stewart's Creek Middle School took a pretty tight increase, or a pretty large increase of 10%. They're at 1125 now, and we kind of expect them to be just under 1,100 next year. And Whitworth Buchanan has been on both sides. They kind of go up really high and then come back down. For example, they were at 6% 4 years ago, and then they went to 0, and then they declined 13%, and then they came back up 3 this year. So they're sitting right at around 745 now. And that would be time for high school.
Get your high school.
Okay, so do we just want to talk about what high school is right this minute and then go into everything else later? Okay. So right now, Blackman High School sits at around 2069. That was a 3% growth from last year. I'm sorry, let me back up. 1970, that was a 3% growth from last year. We expect them to be around 2070 next year, under the same, if the zones are to remain exactly the same. And that number, these numbers that I'm going to give you for next year's projections may be off a little bit based on the fact that I used a different data pool for the actual projections on the maps that we use for rezoning.
Okay.
There is no way for us to go day by day and reproject that number into our mapping.
Sure.
It's a week-long process to recalculate all those.
And quite frankly, even the rezoning, the way it's currently being proposed, would not give you a solid number for 1 year.
Absolutely.
Because you're grandfathering 10 through 12 in the current plan.
Yeah.
And some of them will stay at the school that they're being grandfathered in, and some of them will have to go to where they're being rezoned.
And what we see a lot of times with mass grandfathering, these big grandfathering projects is, it takes James, correct me if I'm wrong, in a situation like this, it's going to take 4 years for it to play out.
Especially when you're talking about high schools. You know, if you grandfather everyone except for incoming freshmen, it's 3 to 4 years. Kind of like building out a subdivision. It takes time for that to cycle through.
Whenever Eagleville. Okay, so Oakland High School, they sit at about 1959 now. They had a 1% growth from last year. We're kind of looking at them, again, from that, if we use that 5% as a baseline, we're looking at about 2060 next year. Riverdale High School had a 4% growth. They're at 1804, and we look to them to be about 1894. Rockvale High School, as you know, has had a significant amount of growth since they opened. They were at 25% between the first and second year, 14 last year. They're at 24 at the moment, and we look for them to be at about 25, 45. But here's the deal. We've got a bigger incoming class, so add 200 to that right away, because that is the difference in the class, the senior class that's leaving and the incoming freshman class. And we know that those students live in that zone, those 200 students, they live in that zone, so they're going to that school.
And those are the ones, some of those would be impacted by the rezoning, what the board
That is
chose.
absolutely true. Yes, sir.
That's like 2,700, just over 27.
2705 was the last body count that I had. Okay, Siegel High School. Siegel High School was pretty flat. They went from -1 to 1 to 0 and back to 1 this last year. They're at 1780, and we look for them to be at around 1870. Smyrna High School had an average growth, and they're at about 2137. They're probably going to end up right around 2250 next year. Stewart's Creek took a pretty significant jump of 11%. They're at 2314, and we kind of look for them to be at about 2430. And that is the breakdown for those numbers.
Thank you. Any board members have any questions regarding these numbers? Anything you need clarification on? Now, these numbers, just to be very clear, Mr. Lee or Mr. Morgan or Mr. Spurlock, the total capacity does not include portables.
That is correct. That's brick and mortar only.
Okay. Thank you. If there's no other questions, we'll go to the next item.
All right, let's see, I think we did the school.
Kind of did this, yeah.
Okay, projected growth, we've talked about that.
Can we talk a little bit about the portables?
Portables, yeah.
That was on
Do
there.
that.
Mr. Lee?
The sheet that you were just passed out, and y'all have seen this quite regularly, basically, all of our schools that are requesting assistance and that are reaching capacity are now getting portables, and we have more requests than we have portables. We currently have 154 classrooms that are portables. Now, that's a mixture of singles and doubles, and if you count the portables themselves, it doesn't, it adds up differently. It's about 110. But classrooms is what we try to focus on. There's 154. On the sheet that you have, which you've seen before, it has a listing out beside each school of where these portables are located and how many the classrooms are there. Each year as we build additions, annexes, new schools, these, Dr. Sullivan and myself, we work together to see where the need is and what the request is, and we move them around. So our highest right now is Smyrna High with 15. Siegel Middle has 13. And then you have Rockville Elementary, Rockville High, they've 10 and 11. And then Oakland High School has 10 classrooms. And then they're various and small. So it's whatever we vote for next year, then we will begin to redistribute the portables that are at these schools. We're also got a couple this year that we got out of capital projects for replacement portables. We just bid those out. We'll be buying 2 new portables, and they will not be added to the fleet, but we're going to take our 2 oldest, roughest, out of service, and then put these 2 in their place.
Let me jump in real quick. When you look at capacity of schools, elementary schools and from middle schools for that matter are pretty set in terms of classroom teacher, kind of thing. In high school, it's kind of a different animal. You've got classes. You got English 1, English 2, English 3. You have AP, you have IB, you have Cambridge, you have a CTE and things of that nature. So what it makes it challenging is we try, and quite frankly, I kind of go back and I understand, roaming, moving, because, let's say a teacher has first period planning, then we move another teacher in there. What we've done primarily, I think, is we just added a portable. That's the reason why you have the Oakland high schools and Riverdale high schools with portables, more portables than actually what it states that their capacity of their building is. And I understood that as a principle that you do. Teachers like to have that classroom for their planning purposes, but we've got to get away from. Of course, if we get the funding to build every addition, every high school, we're still going to have portables. But I think in high school, we're going to have to come to the realization, because we're growing so rapidly, that it's not, beyond the imagination that teachers are going to have to share their rooms. During planning, maybe they can go to the conference room and do their planning or something of that nature. But I think that's one, we used to do that, and Mr. Estes, you remember those days when we'd have to do that. But, I get it, that we need to, but what is better? Is it better to have the kids in a stationary building, or is it better to have the kids in a portable building outside? So, I was just, and you can't do that with elementary because it's a teacher in a classroom. And for middle school, it's primarily that. But in high school, we're going to really have to think outside the box in terms of how we're addressing that need, because you may have one class of English 1 with 32 in there, and you may have another one with 22. They both need a classroom. I mean, you have any comment on that? I mean, I know you're coming from an engineering and construction. Dr. Sullivan, maybe I need to ask you about that. Do you see an issue with that?
Outside of the teacher losing their space, that's better than being in a portable. I mean, it's from a safety standpoint especially. You hate it for your teachers, but from a safety standpoint, I'd much rather have kids in a building.
Mm. And that's a big shift, but we did it, years ago.
Yeah, we used to call
I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I first went to Oakland, I was a floater. Yeah.
Probably going to have to get back to that.
I agree.
More earnestly.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about portables and capacities and that kind of thing?
Mr. Lee?
Yes, sir.
And you probably told us before, and you may not have it with you. Cost of a new portable is what?
A double is about $103,000.
Okay. What does it cost us on the average to move portables?
About $25,000 to $30,000, depending upon where they go. And that includes, it's about $8,000 just to move it from one location to another. Then you have to build ramps. You have to hook up electricity. We have to hook up fire alarm and PA systems. And typically when they get moved, These trailers are not really intended to be moved a lot, and most of ours have been moved at least 2 or 3 times. So as we move them, we incur, especially with the doubles, it's not intended, they're just old, and they weren't intended to be moved 4 and 5 and 6 times. So we incur some damage and roof issue or that sort of thing. Typically, in the past, we had a program where when it was moved, they repainted them to kind of match the school. Well, that's a problem, because if I move it from one school that's red to a school that's yellow, the first thing that principal and those parents want, they don't want that red portable. So I changed that about 3 years ago, and we're in the process of, as we move them or as we get the funding, we're painting them all back portable colors. We're standardizing our colors so that they're all the same. And when you do that, you're going to spend between $8,000 and $10,000 to pressure wash it and get the loose paint off and paint them and that sort of thing. So it varies, but it's somewhere between $18,000 and $25,000 to relocate one, depending on where it goes and what its needs are.
How many did we move this year?
Oh, Lord help. About 25, which is one of the largest moves we've had, and we've got 2 still that are in the setup, paint, get moved because we moved from Laverne Middle. Average is somewhere between 6 and 10. This year was an extremely high number.
Can I ask about a considerable portion of the academic learning at Daniel McKee is in portables. I would say almost half the school is in portables. Now, they haven't been moved around. I think they've been sitting there for a while. What kind of shape and condition are they in?
We had 2 there last year that we reskinned. That's something else that we're looking at. Our oldest portables were plywood, T111. The insides are still pretty good like those because they haven't been moved in a while. The inside is in pretty good shape, but the outside is deteriorating, and they've been painted a half a dozen times. The ones that are the worst, we're reskinning with metal. So we started that last year at a number of the ones that Daniel McKee, Smyrna West, those kind of places where it's more than likely those portables are going to stay there. We have started a rehabilitation program for those. So that's something that we've included in our budget going forward. The one thing I will mention about Daniel McKee, and I may be jumping around a little bit, but you got these older schools. Daniel McKee was on a sewer system for the last however long it's been there. And every time it rained heavily, their sewer backed up because their drip fields didn't. Well, the city of Murfreesboro actually ran sewer out there a couple of years ago. So every time it rained, we would have to pump the sewer system till the water level in the ground went down because it's high rock. We were able to get them off of the sewer system this year. We've got them tied into the city now. So there's things like that that we are also dealing with at our older schools. So it's not just portables. There's infrastructure things that we're looking at and addressing. But we are addressing Daniel McKee. We had some of those at the walls. We're in pretty bad shape. We're addressing that.
There were some plumbing issues at Smyrna West also.
Yes, we're addressing that too.
So of the 25 to 30K to move one, new one, what is the installation cost? What part of that is a new one? I mean, how much does it cost to put a new one in?
$103,000 gets you the portable delivered and set up.
Okay.
Then we build the ramp, so you're probably looking at another $7,000 to $8,000 on top of that for us to get the power and everything hooked up, depending on what school it is. If it's had portables before, which we don't have many that haven't had portables at one time or another, we've already got Middle Tennessee electric poles. We've already got cable run out there, those kind of things. So when we move them away, we don't take the poles and the wires down because 3 to 5 years, we're taking them back. Most of those schools already have some of that infrastructure there. So that does vary a little bit. If it's a school like Stewart's Creek this year, they haven't had portables, fortunate. But so we had probably close to $5,000 in Middle Tennessee electric fees because that's when those schools were built is when Middle Tennessee Electric was trying to get everybody to begin to look at going underground. So there's no overhead poles on that campus. So the first 1,000 feet, they run the poles and the power lines for free. After that, it's so much a foot, and then depending upon your load and your transformer, it varies. So we've had to run new power lines for the elementary, pretty good distance, and then new power for the high school, which wasn't as long. But we don't typically tie those into our building because it's cost prohibitive to do that too.
To give you a point of reference, Mr. Holden, I've had the pleasure to work at 2 high schools, Riverdale and Oakland, where we probably had the second largest mobile home park in our courtyard in Murfreesboro.
Does that include HVAC? Or do we have to get units for the?
They come with
It comes
the
with
units.
the- okay.
Yes, ma'am. 103 gets you the unit ready for children other than power, PA, fire alarm, and a ramp. It's ready to go. Then the other thing is we try and keep an inventory of furniture. Purchasing and my maintenance department, we move a lot of furniture. But when you move, a lot of our furniture is outdated and it doesn't work for the children, middle school, high school. So if I move 7 portables from an elementary to a high school, the furniture can't go because it doesn't work. So we try and keep growth, and that's a 3%, middle school, elementary, and high school in a storage building for these trailers. But when you have a 25-unit flip in one summer, a lot of those came from elementary schools. And they went to middle and high, and we had more than 3%. So there's additional costs sometimes for furniture that we have to buy for the students, because if it's coming from an elementary and going to a high, we don't have the furniture. Now, purchasing does try and project a percentage each year for purchasing new furniture, but a lot of that is to take care of things that get broken in schools. And we do have some schools that have asked for new furniture, and we try and build a little bit of that into the budget as we go, but we can't roll it all over in one year. So it is a little bit fluid, but that's a good ballpark.
Portables, they've been an issue ever since I've been on the school board. And we've tried our best to eliminate portables, but we haven't. We keep adding. Or it looks like we're to the point where we got to add some more. So the cost of moving these things, we're averaging $300,000-400,000 on the average before this year. Now we're up to $750,000 this year in moving portables. Portables is not the answer long term. I mean, I understand we're going to have a few here and there to get by, but it's our obligation to this county to build these schools to the capacity we feel like they need to be built to serve the communities. And that's what we need to be doing here today, is figuring out what capacities we want these schools at, where we want to manage them to, and then see what it's going to take to get there. If we got to build additions, we build additions. I understand their county government, they'd rather see us ask for additions than ask for building new schools. So to me, that's where we need to be drilling down into, is seeing what our capacity issues are and seeing what schools that we can add additions to and get the ball rolling and get away from this portable talk.
Is there a secondary market for the portables that we get rid of?
Well, by the time we
They're not.
are finished, we actually gave one. How long ago was that, Mike? 7-8 years ago down there at Royal Smyrna Primary? We gave one to a church group because we were scared to sell it. And when they hooked to it just before they pulled out of the parking lot and went to make the turn, it fell off the frame. So the answer to your question is I would be uncomfortable trying to sell them. Personally, I think we would be better off to see if there's some scrap value or something like that and try and get what we can. But we've got some that are 25, 30 years old.
We got some that should have already been to Charlie Clark's, and they're still sitting out there at our schoolyard. So they need to be scrapped. If we don't scrap them, they're going to get used again.
Yeah. I don't think they're in that condition. The ones that we're going to be replacing, that's my intention, is to see what.
Talking about these that are falling apart when you move them down the road.
Yes, sir.
The ones that need to go to Charlie Clark.
On this, everyone has one of these, right? Does everyone have one of these that Mr.
Morgan did.
Who did this? Mr. Morgan did?
Payne did that one.
No, I don't have that.
Can we get,
I don't have that
can
one.
we get these copies? He's highlighted, next year, those that, are over capacity. When you see them, I would have you look at those that are 10% over capacity or more. Those that are the ones that are hitting a critical mass, if you will. Now, one of the things that Mr. Lee didn't tell you is that some of our existing schools do not have the ability to add much capacity to them.
Yeah, that's something I didn't know when I needed to broach that, but you're correct.
We need to do it right now.
Here's something that, until we built Plainview Elementary, there was no plan prior to that, or any school that's been built to be added onto. So the infrastructure's not there. Typically, what happens is, even when you add portables, you add students. And when you add students and you get over capacity, the cafeteria is only designed to feed so many children. Well, we can put more children in portables. We can add an annex on. But if that cafeteria is not expanded and the kitchen's not expanded, they're starting to feed children at 9 and they may be going till 1 or 2 o'clock. The other thing, and this is a big thing that Mr. Spurlock and I, we've had a lot of conversations about traffic. And sometimes he gets very frustrated with me because I keep telling him there's really nothing we can do. And I'm going to use Blackman Middle as an example today. That infrastructure in the roadway system was designed for about 1,000 to 1,200 students. We got over 1,500 kids there now. With 1,500 students comes about 350 more cars. And it depends on where that school's located. You take a Blackman or a Kittrell, Wilson, some of those schools that's where their means and income is a little bit higher, those parents, more percentage-wise, students coming in cars. So what happens is the school is there, and we add on to it, and then we bring in another 300 or 400 cars. Well, our interior roadway system's not designed for it. Mr. Estes is shaking his head. He sat out there at Wilson in that line before on Angie Lane. There's nothing we can do about that because we don't have the land. So there's a point where, yes, we can add on, and one of the conversations today, Stewart's Creek Elementary. Yes, we can add 16 classrooms. The cars are coming, and I've got a county commissioner that lives at the opposite end of the elementary, and I get the call that says, they're lined up past my house and they're halfway to Amberville Road. What are y'all doing? And the bottom line is, the more students that come, the longer that line gets. And our schools do a wonderful job. I've sat out there and watched them in the rain and the snow, and I've watched them with umbrellas, and they load those children. They can get them out of there in about 30 minutes. And that's really good. It works well with our buses. I mean, they really do. They all do. The problem comes really in the mornings. And nobody, we open our schools 45 minutes prior to bell time. We serve breakfast. It's free. It's warm. It's nice buildings. The majority of our parents want to show up in that last 15 minutes. And you can't do it. They just can't.
While you're on to that, I think there's a state law that's going through that
Yes.
no earlier than 8:30.
8:30.
Now, I'm sure they understand that we don't have that many contractors, and no system does, that for everyone to come to school at 8:30. And we don't, I'd hate to see what that would look like, so I would encourage you to reach out to our local representatives and explain to them, we understand the science behind younger students learning better when they get more rest and stuff like that. However, if everyone gets there at 8:30, then we might not start school at 10 o'clock. You know?
Right.
And that push-
So what I'm trying to say is we can work and do additions and annexes, but everybody needs to understand what's coming with it is the traffic and all these other issues that we are unable to address, and especially if you get into our older schools, and people don't want to think about Blackman Elementary being an older school, but it is. And when that school was built, you probably had 60% of children riding a school bus in the Blackman area because it was more rural, farming. And it's more like 35 or 40% now. So it's flipped. And I'm not opposed to building an annex. We actually have the land there. And when we do that, we actually have land. And we can probably add some stackability to Blackman Elementary. But to Stewart's Creek, it's not there. And that's a newer school, and it just wasn't designed for it. So I say all that to say we are addressing it in our future designs. And we are able to add some things on these schools. But with that comes some additional cost because there's the water, the sewer, the electricity's not there. Rockville Middle is a prime example. One of the first things Mr. Barlow asked me was, do I get more bathrooms? Okay, we've added 400 children out there, but I can't do anything about his bathrooms because it wasn't designed for it. So we're adding the students, but the same amount of bathrooms. We are able to increase his cafeteria, but it's taking in addition. We did the same thing at Laverne Middle. When we added onto it, we added cafeteria space, but we couldn't do anything about the kitchen. When we did Oakland and Riverdale's expansions 14 years ago, we did increase their cafeteria and we did increase their kitchen. Their kitchen is okay for what we're proposing to do over the next little bit, but their cafeteria is not. So that's one of the schools where we can address it to get them more space. But you have to address those type issues as well as just adding the classrooms. You've got to address cafeteria, you've got to address the kitchen, and then if you can, and there are a few examples where we can improve the traffic flow, we will do it. And when it's not, you need to understand you're going to get some phone calls. And I understand the county commissions, they want to maximize everything we got. And I get it. I get it. But when you do an addition or an expansion, you address the situation at one school.
You have a feel for what schools or what campuses can be added to and which ones can't? I know you got some.
I've sent that out a couple of different times to schools that have excess property. But
I think you can go through that when you didn't look at your 5-year building program.
I think we need to definitely make sure we highlight the school campuses that we know we cannot do any additions. And then that way we'll know where we can do additions.
Right.
That would be very helpful.
I know Miss Maxwell and I were at Stewart's Creek last week, and my son was there to 2nd grade through 9th grade, and the traffic patterns and the street and everything is still the same. They've changed nothing with that road over there. And, you know, they're beyond capacity. I mean, they were telling us that they take, you know, stuff out of storage and try to make another classroom or make something else
yes,
that they can use it.
they at Stewart's Creek Elementary, we've bought, I call them the Dutch barn storage buildings for them to take their supplies that will not freeze out of the building. And I'm talking about paper products and those kind of things. We can't leave wax and stripper and, you know, certain cleaning chemicals outside, but we've taken everything out of the building they can. They're storing them in buildings, and then we've converted those closets into small classrooms. We've maximized, and we do that. It's been done at Oakland, and you know, other schools. We go in, and as demographics change, we're cleaning out closets. I went through Stewart's Creek High School about 2 weeks ago with the staff there, looking at what we can and can't do, and they're moving books now. And I've got a proposal. Mr. Beaudry said we'll find some money, and you know, I don't have all the numbers put together yet, but we're starting to turn those book storage rooms and storage areas and combining 3 into 1 so that we can make classrooms out of the other 2. We're looking at things where there was offices before and had cubicles. We're looking at taking those out and just telling them they're going to have to float and find an office at another school or come up here or do whatever, because we're going to turn them into classrooms.
And we've been doing that for years.
Yes, we have.
I mean, we've been doing that for years. Some of us have been doing it for years. There's some schools that still we could go back in, and I still go back to Riverdale. There's some areas over there that could be repurposed back into some classroom space.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do prior to building on or doing anything like that. You want to go into the existing projects is it all right?
Yes, absolutely.
Chairman, the existing projects that we currently have going on and how they will impact on what we're looking at as far as our building program?
Okay. Major building projects we got right now, item number 6 is Smyrna Middle Annex renovation. We're renovating the original annex there at Smyrna Middle to add classrooms there. What that will do is allow us to rezone some of Blackman Middle that's along the old Nashville Highway. There's an odd section through there. We're going to be able to rezone some of those children back to Smyrna Middle. We're looking, that's what that does. Of course,
What are we projected? I know we got a late start on that renovation. When are we projected?
we're hoping that we will have it all finished by August when school starts back. I know we will have at least half of it for sure finished based on our schedule, but we're predicting all of it to be ready by August when we come back.
That would be pushing it for you guys. So, I mean, that's your decision, but I would put that rezoning off for another year.
I would.
I mean, when you open it up, we can still put it off
Yes.
for another year.
Yes. We have Rockville Middle. Rockville Middle's taking care of Rockville Middle.
All right.
We're getting the children out of the portables, putting them in a classroom with some growth, but with the growth that's predicted, they're going to fill up within 2 years. So we're putting a Band-Aid on Rockville Middle. Rockville Elementary, we're adding the annex. I dropped one on Mr. Spurlock the day before yesterday that I got from the city. There's another 199 homes coming right adjacent to us, next to the middle school, across from the elementary. It hadn't been approved yet, but it's going through the process at the city. So there's another, that's the 4th one out there that is, you can almost walk to the school to get to. So Rockville Elementary, there again, that annex is taking care of Rockville Elementary. No rezoning in place. Other than that, we have Buchanan Elementary. We're spending right at $1 million to get it off of an antiquated sewer system that TDEC has been threatening to shut down for the last 2 years. We're getting it tied into the city sewer. We hope to have that finished in about a month. Central Magnet HVAC, they have completed the work. We're in the final punch list, final tweaking to make sure that system works like it should. And everything seems to be going very well there. And we have recently bid out 3 HVAC projects. Smyrna High School, about $1.5 million. That's not, need about another 2.5, but that will improve the situation there. Same thing at Laverne High. And then we've got 2 smaller projects that we bid at Laverne and Oakland this past week that we're hoping to get the design started on. You approved it in our last board meeting. We are steadily going through our capital projects list. Contractors that we use, they're maxed out, and it's taken us a little longer than normal to get a lot of projects started, but we'll get to everybody. We're also looking at our capital projects for this coming year, Fund 177. I know we ain't got there yet, but it's coming quick. I'm already working on that. I've had 2 or 3 meetings with my staff and our contractors, and there's going to be some sticker shock.
Right now, what's our, I think Doug, you may have mentioned, what's our balance in their capital maintenance, capital project maintenance? Because we did have a backlog, in terms of.
We're over 10 million on the amended budget for this fiscal year because of the backlog. Of, what was planned last year, just couldn't get to it with, shortage of labor. Mr. Lee could probably talk more about that, about labor shortage and, also just getting parts.
But we're in the process now of writing a lot of POs, so they're going to be.
In this last year and a half, 2 years, what's the time frame of starting a project, trying to get approved and get it completed? How's that changed?
Oh, we have a new state fire marshal system going on. We've had the same reviewers and engineers for probably the last 7 to 10 years, and that all changed this year. There's a new director at the top, so some of the things that we've done in the past under IBC, they're changing their philosophy. We're seeing a lot of that now as they go through and do our annual fire inspections in all of our schools, the local fire marshals. There's things that Holloway, that school's been there 50, 70 years, whatever it is, and they have open stairwells. The new fire marshal now is requiring us to close those stairwells in, so we're going to spend a couple $100,000 trying to close in stairwells that have been grandfathered because of that, but they're telling us, you're going to keep using this building, you're going to have to do it. So there's a lot of changes coming from that standpoint. Materials, availability is stretched out. Things that used to take us 12 months are probably taking 14 to 16 now. Things that took 17 are now taking, close to 20 to 22 months. So we're having to look at all of our schedules and extrapolate them out because it's not just the materials now. The other problem is with all the ESSER funds that have landed, you've got you got Davidson, Wilson, Williamson, and us, and we're all right here. Now Knox and Memphis, they're out there by themselves. They don't fight amongst themselves like we do. We fight for the limited amount of manpower and contractors that do this. So a prime example is the last 2 projects that we bid, the HVAC projects. Normally we would have 4 to 5 bidders. We had 1. And the bottom line is they don't have the manpower. And they've got, with the ESSER work and all the school work and all the other things that are going on, they don't have the capacity to do it.
Speaking of HVAC, where are we on Central Magnet as far as completion deadline?
It is. They finished at Christmas, and they're in the process of the final tuning and punch list, and they'll probably be out of there here in a couple of weeks. Good. But overall, it's been very, very well completed. Good. And the older the buildings, the more complications we run into, because when you go to new equipment, the electrical wiring, you end up adding additional cost when you do that because you have to. Sometimes it's fused in Oakland or Riverdale. When we do something there, I'm going to be looking at their main water shutoffs because right now we can't shut the water off. Those old backflow preventers and valves and those kind of things, they all leak. So there's going to be some added cost to some of these projects that we're going to have to address that infrastructure because we can't do the addition without addressing the infrastructure. So there's things like that come along with adding on to old buildings as well. It's not just the square footage and the classrooms, it's the infrastructure too.
I think we just seen that with the HVAC system at Oakland, where we made some makeshift classrooms and things like that, and it affects the airflow.
It does, because it wasn't designed that way, and we're limited as to what we can do, and that's why there's so many of these HVAC projects on the capital projects list, is because they are antiquated, and we've made those changes.
In a lot of our schools, I was thinking about Thurman Francis, where we've taken that stage and made classrooms to it. When we do things like that, we've got to have an airflow. We've got to put a vent in that door and make that, because that's where you get in the summertime, you get a lot of that humidity.
CO2 and humidity. That's the other thing that we're battling with the old systems. We didn't have the humidity issues 20 years ago that we have now. And those systems, a lot of those systems weren't designed to dehumidify.
Right.
So where you find your biggest problems is your libraries, your gyms, and your auditoriums. And the reason you have that is with the library, you have the books. Anything over 55%, librarians start having to come apart because their pages start raveling. And we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in books in all of our libraries. So we just went to Eagleville this past summer and spent a couple $100,000 to basically change out that unit. And the biggest thing it was going to do is add dehumidification to the library. Because what they've been doing for the last 10 years is they open the doors to the hallway. They set big box fans in their doors, and they're trying to pull air in and pull air out to keep the humidity down. And you get to a certain point, that doesn't work anymore. So we addressed that. And there's things like that, your gym floors. I won't go into the specifics on it, but what happens is they'll warp. And you've got $250,000 or $300,000 in a gym floor. I don't think y'all are interested in me coming in here and telling you we got to do out a gym floor because the floor warped because the humidity got too high. So there's things like that that we battle. I mean, even as late as, a Siegel Middle or, people think, well, they're not that old of a school, but they're 15, 18 years old. And you don't have to go back far to not find dehumidification.
Well, I can't think of any more uplifting information that's
I'm
been
sorry,
brought to us.
sometimes I seem to be the gloom and doom guy.
I know you came into and you were telling me the different kinds of systems and heating and air systems that we have through across the district. I remember it being just an unreal crazy about it. Is what Oakland's going through right now, is that the same system, the same age at Riverdale? So you kind of know what you're going to have to deal with?
Okay. They're fairly comparable. Now there's individual components because they just died that we've had to replace, but they're basically the same system. Okay. It's the same style, it's the same type. Smyrna and Laverne are the same way. The schools that we've got, the middle schools, that were all built around the same period. They've got comparable cooling tower type.
I was hoping that was the case.
Yes, and what exacerbates the problem is if you've got multiples, and they're all the same age and they're the same style, you got the same problem at both places, which doubles the cost factor to get them fixed and changed out. And one of the things we were able to do at some of the schools, we had pneumatic controls. Pneumatic is air, and it controls the dampers that open and close and those kind of things, and we're now electronic. But what happens is you have to add other components because the pneumatic and the electronic are not the same. The electronic is much better, but you don't maximize it because the equipment doesn't have all the parts and pieces, and you can't put all the parts and pieces on. So it's an improvement, but it's not 100% fixed. We can see it now, which helps cut down on our labor, sending somebody out there that doesn't know what the problem. We at least got an idea of what we're looking at before we go look at them now, because we do have it where we can see everything in maintenance.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I got a question. Since we're having the contractor issues or whatever, taking longer, do you have enough manpower that you can start earlier, or you need more would manpower on our end of it help by being able to start projects quicker and move them? Or is that not an issue?
What we could do as a body is maybe start like these projects that we're going to be talking about, the 5-year building program, is start that in late November, early December. Back those up a month or so.
I mean, it sounds like y'all got plenty to do, just looking at it, but sounds like y'all are pretty busy.
We're not sitting around with our feet up.
But that's what I'm saying.
I had this conversation the other day. I've been here 14 years, going on 15 years now, and I have the same size department now that I had 14 or 15 years ago, and we've added millions and millions of square feet and a half a dozen new schools, and I don't know how many additions and all that we've done. But we've kind of reached our...
I think it's a testimony to your effectiveness and efficiency.
Well, I'm not going to...
In your group. I'm talking about you and your group. I mean, I
agree
think
with that.
Yeah.
But if
that would help us, because what it would do is mean we could start a project sooner so that maybe we could keep on to... Yes, that would help some. And I do show that in our 5-year building program. If you'll look on the columns where it says start and design and that, I've backed all of that up, trying to... And we'll look at it again this time next year, and I'll pull it back even further if we need to. But yes, that would help get us the design started, which allow us to get the construction started. And there's a limited number of contractors that do school work anyway. And if we can get out ahead of Wilson or Williamson or Davidson, whoever, that bid cycle, if we can get out in front, that we can get possibly a better number and possibly get out ahead and have more people bid. But as you get further out, the bid number dwindles.
Well, and two, you got to remember, it doesn't look like we're going to have a shortage of projects for another person to do. I mean, we've got plenty going on. It looks like it's going to continue. So that was just my point, was
Yes, sir.
maybe
It would help.
start a little early.
Yes,
you
sir,
know,
we can.
because we know they're going to be a little longer, so just start a little earlier.
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Lee, can we, just so that I'm understanding, and I appreciate what you do with the workforce that you have, it's very impressive. Can we expect to see you requesting some additions to your department to help facilitate this growth in the budget process?
Yes, ma'am.
Expect it, okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
I've got one, Mr. Lee. The numbers you gave me on portables a few minutes ago, you spent approximately $600,000 moving portables last
I
year.
think Mr. Beaudry and I budgeted about $550. I think's what we budgeted, but it's going to be close. Yes, sir.
What line items that come out of?
General purpose maintenance.
So that's money we could use somewhere else if we didn't have to put portables everywhere.
Yes, sir.
That would help on our backlog, wouldn't it?
HVAC.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
While we're on this item, I would like to inquire, and I sent an email. I know that there have been, in the community, I've talked to some commissioners and some different people who have said that they've sent some property opportunities to us. Now, I get potential. I would like to, in the very near future, know some more of what have we been presented with, and is there anything that, and maybe you can address this today, is there anything that looks promising that would help us relieve? I know we've been looking at the 840-96 corridor. Is there anything that is, and I know price is going to be a major issue, but that's just the
I'm not
market we're
asking
in.
this- Price, I'm
This
just
was
asking available.
this was the one you and I talked about yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes.
And the piece that's on Rocky Fork Road, almost to the Williamson County line, that's a piece that Commissioner Gurley reached out to us about, and I did call, and it is available. The problem is where it's shoehorned in at. It's almost at the Williamson County line, and for those that know that area, it's almost across from my mother-in-law's home. Cooks Lane, Rocky Fork Road, Williamson County line. I can't throw a rock there anymore, but I used to be able to. It's in such a corner that for a middle school, there's very little relief. You got Rock Springs Middle, possibly Stewart's Creek Middle. The problem is as you go west, back toward Rockville, that area is not going, it's very dense, and Shane can speak to this better than I can. You got a lot of land, but it's very, 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 very low density. So if we dropped in a 1,000-seat middle school there, I'm going to help Stewart's Creek Middle and a little because it's that side, and I'm going to help Rock Springs Middles. Okay, Shane, pick a number. I'm going to put him on the spot. 300, 400, 500 kids, maybe?
About between 400 and 500.
All right, so 400 to 500 kids, and that growth rate's not going to be there. It's going to sit there because of where it is for the next, I don't know how long, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's going to sit there for quite some time with no growth.
Part of the problem with that is they're out in that direction. There is growth, but it's pockets. You have subdivisions coming up in pockets, and part of that is what Trey's speaking to is infrastructure. There is not good infrastructure out there.
That piece is going to open up because the city of Smyrna is running a sewer line up the creek that's going to get to that piece of, right across the street from that piece of property. So that does open that piece of property up. But because it's in that pocket, in that corner, it's hard for us to be able to reach around and get enough students to justify it. And I know that's hard to understand, but it's just the way it is. I would hate to see us spend $45 million on a middle school, and for the next 10 years, it's half full. Because then I'm going to have some county commissioners going, we gave y'all money for this, and now it's sitting over there, and it's never been anything but half full. So yes, we've looked at that property.
Thank you.
We've had a number of members of the community reach out with property. I've called, talked to numerous people over on that Veterans Parkway, 84096. Put Mr. Spurlock on the spot. I kept telling him I'm calling, and this is what they're telling me. He said, well, let me call the next one. So I gave him the name and the number, and guess what? He got the same answer I got from all the others.
I think he was a lot nicer to me, though, Mr.
And basically what they say is, yes, we know they're building around us. Yes, we know our property's there. Yes, we know we have enough. It's only going to get more valuable, and we'd like to sit on it a little bit longer because we don't need the money. And they're very polite, and you can't really argue with them. I mean, Mr. John L. Beatty's probably sent me 7 pieces of property in the last, I don't know, couple of months, and he stopped on his tractor, and I call him, and he'll pull over from disking or plowing, whatever he's doing, and we talk for 30 minutes trying to figure out this piece and who owns that piece, and does he know him, and can he make a phone call for me? And so we're exhausted, and we're looking, and I'll stand here today. We're still looking, and if you've got some properties, Shane did a map for me recently. We looked at the soils map. Could it potentially have enough soil? You can rule a lot of them out because they end up being on one-lane roads.
Yeah.
Or they end up being on a road that's one way in and one way out. Well, if we build a school back in there,
Thank you.
and we have one problem, we've got everybody blocked in. You know, it becomes a safety thing. So you can begin to eliminate a lot of pieces of property just because the infrastructure. The other thing you've really got to watch right now is water. I can build a sewer system to get to a lot of these pieces of property, but CUD does not have the capacity to increase the water supply. They've got a 6-inch, we looked at, Mr. Estes and I rode around on a very nice piece of property, probably 2 years ago now, 400 and something acres.
I drove you guys around.
Right. I tried to get them to buy it and let me hunt on it, but that didn't work either. But it was a great piece of property out off a little bit further out toward 840, cut back over toward Rock Vale. The problem is there's a 6-inch water line, and because it is rural and there is no possibility of sewer going out there, and there's no possibility of major residential development, CUD has no interest in upgrading the water lines. And we spent $850,000 to help CUD upgrade the water line to do Plainview. And y'all know how close that is to the interstate.
Yeah.
You're looking at, I'd be scared to guess how many millions of dollars, and Mr. Reed would probably choke my neck, all the acquisitions we'd have to have for additional easements and all this other kind of stuff. It just gets financially unreasonable. So a lot of the pieces we look at for these various reasons, people go, well, that's a great piece of property. Can't argue with that, but I can't get a sewer on it, and I don't have enough water for fire protection. That's the kick with water. Mm-hmm. We've got to have a minimum flow and a minimum pressure for fire protection, and you can't get it. So we're still looking.
What size is that going out Rocky Fork Road there? The one that we talked about, Rock Springs or Rock something?
They upgraded it recently to a 12-inch because they're able to sell it. It goes all the way to the Williamson County line because they're selling to Nolensville. That's why they upgraded that.
So that property that Mr. Gurley talked about is
has water, and it does have sewer.
But the issue with that is
it's so far tucked in that corner.
The density of
around it and what's going to happen behind it, because it is in that corner, it's just not going to fill up.
Eventually,
yes,
it will, maybe 10 years down the road, but at this time it
maybe,
would not.
if they can figure out a way to go behind it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, back toward 840, back through there, because that piece is going to be able to tie to sewer. That's the only reason it becomes feasible there is because of sewer.
Right.
But that's the end of the line for the sewer. Now, that may open up a little bit further piece on the opposite side of TNT, the Tilly's place, but I don't know that I
Do
don't
you-
think they're interested in selling.
Do you see, out in the Walter Hill area, do you see them ever running sewer? I mean,
I hate to say never, but the problem for the city of, that would have to be the city of Murfreesboro. And the city of Murfreesboro's got a capacity limit. They figured out 2 years ago that that they've got a finite sewer capacity. And the reason that is, and I won't bore you with the long story, but Smyrna, Laverne, Murfreesboro all to get their water out of the Stones River. So when you take water out, you treat it, you send it to your constituents, it comes back, you treat it, and you dump it downstream. Well, what's below Murfreesboro? Smyrna's first intake plant is at 840. Can't think of the name of the road now, I'm drawing a blank, but you can see it from 840. So that's their first intake. So they can only dump X amount of millions of gallons because that has to be diluted by the time it gets to Smyrna's intake. So I can build up capacity, but I can only dump so much water into the river. The river's not going to change. And then when you have drought and the river goes down, they reduce how much you can dump because of the flow and the amount of water that's there. So it goes up and down. The city of Murfreesboro over on Cherry Lane has had fields rented, I don't know how long, forever, that they're running their sewer water line. They've got a spur that goes off of it so that they can spray it on these farmers' fields. Well, they went to State Farm. They came to us 4 or 5 years ago, and we tapped onto it at a fairly significant price, but it's going to save us money over time because they sell it to us at a different rate. We tapped onto that gray line and ran it up to Siegel High School, so now all of Siegel's ball fields are irrigated off of their water that was going to the river. They're trying to find large places where they can get this water out of their system because they've still got that maximum they can dump in Walter Hill. They've got the maximum they can dump in on the other side over on Murfreesboro Road. They're boxed. They can't do anymore. So they know that in the next, and I don't know what it's 10 years, whatever their current growth is. That's why they're no longer selling to anybody outside the city. They're not building infrastructure outside the city that's not already there. If they don't have any deals, they're not getting it. The Plainview property, they had a deal to run sewer for it, but they didn't have it finalized, signed, and sealed, so they've lost their deal. Our deal, we followed the same route, but it's private. We could tie in. We ran a little over a mile to get over to Epps Mill to get our sewer over there because the property that we bought would not perk for a sewer system for our school system. So we ran over to that sewer. They already had the design. We just used their design and put our system in, but that developer cannot tie into us, and he cannot do what we did. Schools, parks, there's one other special governmental thing that can be done. That's the only thing outside the city that they will allow to tie in. Everything else has got to be annexed. But they do have a finite number of residential units in their head. And when they reach it, they're done. So that's going to prevent a lot of that going way out, and it just gets cost prohibitive.
Most of the developments that are going on out in the county are put on drip systems anyway. They're not.
Yes, and they've gone out through there and bought all the good properties.
Right. So they're able to put 200 homes on a 20-acre field that's got good soil.
Yes, and just about all of that is gone.
There's still a few.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. I see them still, buying land right and left, and those will be in homes sooner or later. I know for a fact that Mr. Hollinshead has bought over $10 million worth of properties in the Las Casas area. And it's not the sewers the issue, it's the water line. As soon as they get a water line out there, you'll see those houses go up.
Is this water line one of the issues, or this issue that you just talked about, the sewage and the capacity for the city? Is that partly what was impacting the 96 property that we were looking at previously?
No, up 96 to 840, CUD has plenty of pressure.
Okay.
We were fine. It was sewer, but we had a deal with the city of Murfreesboro to go out the back like we did at Plainview,
Okay.
We were going to go out the back, I can't think of the name of the road, but there was a sewer system that's cross-country, about a mile away, that we could tie into.
Okay.
We could do the same thing, we can do a pump station. But there's a limit, mileage-wise, in your elevation, how many up and downs, and it's hydraulic calculation, which
Okay.
we won't go into, but there's a limit to how far you can pump.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Sharp, I think you have a question.
Yes, I've got a question, and I'm not sure who can answer this, but I'm told that up on the north end or the west side, that there is a part around the Carruthers neighborhood that's dually zoned. It's dual zoned for Rutherford County and Williamson County. Is that true? Does anybody know that?
Not to
No?
my knowledge.
No?
Now, the subdivision may be split, and part of it's in
Be split.
Williamson. I think that's what.
So
you're-
it's just
that
split? Okay.
The subdivision has bled over, and part of it's in Williamson, and part of it's in, and that's why they're calling it dual. And it's really not dual, it's just that the county line splits the subdivision.
Okay, because I said, I mean, if we can dual zone something, then maybe that's something strategically that we could do at the line. So, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Lee on this issue? Okay, next item. 5-year building plan.
Change of paper. So, I have brought 3 options. Basically, they're similar to what you saw a few weeks back. There's a little tweak. And basically, it's the same projects. It's just dependent upon how many you want to try and do at one time and what you want to spend. So in option number 1, we're showing 3 projects: Blackman Elementary addition, Stewart's Creek Elementary addition, and an addition at Smyrna High. And that would be $50,600,000. In year 2, you would see Stewart's Creek Middle, 16 classrooms, similar to what we did at Rockville. Blackman High addition, Laverne High addition, and Riverdale High addition. And then the 3rd year would be Oakland High addition and an 840-96 corridor, and I'm still calling it that. Just somewhere on that west side, we're going to have an elementary school. And I go back to what I said earlier. The addition at Stewart's Creek and the addition at Blackman High is going to add students, but eventually there's going to have to be an elementary school built out that way, or we're going to have to come up with another option. And I'll leave that to Mr. Spurlock. So that's option number 1 that we're looking at. So if you go to option number 2, it's basically 4 projects the first year, which is Blackman Elementary, Riverdale High, Smyrna High, Stewart's Creek. All we've done is taken Riverdale and move it up 1 year. And your price tag goes from $50 million to $76 million. The other projects that are in year 2 remain the same. And I'm calling this the more aggressive. Then you got option number 3. We have Riverdale, Smyrna, Laverne High, Blackman Elementary, Stewart's Creek Elementary, and our price tag goes from 76 to 103. And each time those projects move up. In option 2, Oakland High moved from year 3, moved up to year 2, and Oakland and Blackman are still sitting in year 2. And that's based on Shane's numbers and looking at what we think we could do. Could we hold off 18 months before we started? Can we hold off 2 years before we start? And looking at the enrollment numbers, that's kind of what predicts what we're doing. And
Mr. Lee,
yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, see, I don't have that handout. Could I ask you to repeat option number 2?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
number 3 very quickly?
Yes, ma'am. Option number 2, in year 1, Blackman Elementary, Riverdale High School Edition, Smyrna High School Edition, Stewart's Creek Elementary. The only change between option 1 and option 2 is Riverdale moves up 1 year.
Okay. And then 3?
Option 3, year 1 is Riverdale, Smyrna, Laverne High, Blackman Elementary, Stewart's Creek Elementary. And your various price tags for option number 1 for year 1 is $50,600,000. Option number 2 for year 1 is $76,950,000. And option 3, year number 1, is $103 million, I'm sorry.
We wish.
Like that deal.
1,000 would be good. In option 3, what's in year 2?
Stewart's Creek Middle, Blackman High, Oakland High.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions, comments, concerns, members of the board?
My concern is always is being aggressive. And we know what $52, $53 million a year gets us. It gets us where we are right now. We don't gain anything. So if we're going to do anything, we got to spend some money. We're going to make a difference. And I don't know, if we don't do it now, when do we do it? Time is not going to get any better.
We're still building.
It's going to cost us more to borrow money. It's going to cost us more to build the buildings. And the land's even going to get higher if we decide to buy land. It's already got to the point we can't find land. So I like the high school additions, but I'd rather see all the high school additions done together. Because I know with the in my past experiences here, when you go through an election year, you're going to be changing faces. And on the school board, you're going to be changing faces at the county commission. And whatever they approve this next year is pretty much all we're guaranteed. After that, it's all renegotiated.
I have concerns there as well. We need to front load as much of the high schools and get in better shape there. So, because next year, year after that.
And these additions we're looking at is our older schools. 50, I mean, they're right at 50 years old. And we've added on. But in that process, there's been some things that we know that wouldn't handle properly. And we got to go back and fix some of those things. So I'd rather for us to attack this thing from doing all the additions together. And let's fix these older schools, bring them up to the capacities that these newer schools are. The Stewart's Creeks, the Rockvales, the Eagles, Blackmans. And let them have be comfortable going through those school buildings as those kids are.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I do have one. Do you
Mr. Holton?
think if we do what Mr. Young said and add all the high school additions at the same time and what we're talking about, what's that going to do to you as far as being able to get them done and contractors available? I mean, we can do what we want to here today. However, how realistic will it be? Or do we just say we get the money and then worry about it? I don't know. So
Your first problem, and I may be speaking out of turn, is going to be getting the money from the county commission. That's going to be our first hurdle.
Well,
The second hurdle is, you're correct, there very well could be a problem having enough workforce to do them all at the same time. I'm not saying we can't, but I won't know that till you bid them out.
let's go back to capacity, okay? Riverdale's not at capacity. With the rezoning, it will take at least a minimum of 2 years to reach capacity. Oakland's not at capacity. We're not doing any rezoning over there. It'll probably take 2 to 3 years for them to reach the capacity. Siegel is about 78% capacity. It hasn't grown any. Now, I do want to correct something. I think perhaps what Mr. Creasy told you that what he was intending to say. They have a teacher capacity of 1950. However, it's the building in itself is much greater capacity. I think as we look, and this is the board has to do, is I agree, quite frankly, with Mr. Young. We've got a lot of, and it is like putting a Band-Aid over a gushing wound. But I think before we start looking at the Oaklands, the Riverdales, we do have Stewart's Creek that is at capacity and over capacity. And Smyrna's the same way. How many portables?
Scared
15?
Stewart's Creek's fixing to be our new next Rockville, what I'm afraid of.
So I think we could strategically look at this in terms of, and nobody likes to rezone, quite frankly, but guess what? When you add on to a building, you're probably going to be rezoning some. Or if you build another school, you're going to rezone some. I just don't see currently, like I said, if we had taken an aggressive, and we may do that with Riverdale, perhaps, but currently, their enrollment is what? Dr. Sullivan, what's Riverdale's enrollment as of January the 14th of 2022?
1804.
1804.
I have the sheet in front of me, so.
And their capacity?
Is 20, hold on, I want to make sure I give you the right number. 2068. They're 264 under capacity.
And what are we looking at, Shane, of potentially rezoning over there?
First year, we're looking at about
70 kids?
70 if we do just freshmen.
Yeah.
We really don't know, because we don't know how many of those kids that got rezoned to Rockville are going to turn around and come back. And I heard from a lot of parents that do want to come back, they were overcrowded, and they had an older sibling who went to Riverdale, and they're more than ready to come now. Of course, over the next couple of years, because of the gradual grandfathering in, those kids are going to start coming back. And I know that if we don't get this approved and get this going, so in 2 years, Mr. Spurlock, they're going to be there, and we're going to have a massive number of portables back again at Riverdale High School.
And let me make this perfectly clear, okay? I'm not opposed to adding on to buildings and growing the capacity. What I'm looking at is I'm looking at a Blackman Elementary School that has been significantly over capacity for a long time. I'm looking at a Stewart's Creek Elementary School that we can only put we put one more portable and that's it.
Yes, sir. Or I'm going to take their playground, which is going to get us in trouble with TDOT.
Now, if the board pleases, wants us to do it, we will bring all of them to the county commission. However, I'm thinking our greatest needs. 2-3 years, you're right, it could fill up. We don't know that, but what we do know is Stewart's Creek Elementary is significantly overcrowded, and we know that Blackman Elementary has, how many portables do they have?
9.
So my thing is, and then like I said, I keep going back to this elephant in the room with Siegel High School. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I see Stewart's Creek High, and I see Smyrna High, and Siegel High. It's out there where it's not anywhere near capacity.
I think that's where we gotta go back and look at our rezoning, and I know there's been some discussion about looking at a massive rezoning of Oak County.
I agree.
And I think there's some of these, matter of fact, I don't know if Stewart's Creek couldn't be helped out by some of those elementary schools.
I agree with that too. I think
Elementary schools is not at capacity down.
The only issue, and we looked at that, Mr. Young, I'm glad you brought that up. We looked at that. We looked at Brown's Chapel. We looked at Rocky Fork Elementary. The problem with that is, and quite frankly, it's something you can't control. It's the same way with this has been. I've been in this for over 30 years in this school, just in this school district, and the school boards that have done their job, they've done the best that they can do. We rezoned. I can recall Cason Lane area because of Riverdale and Blackman. I don't know, I think it's at least 4 times that's been rezoned. And I don't think it was anything intentional, but you just can't determine that density that Mr. Lee's talking about when that's, like, for example, when we looked at these, we looked at Brown's Chapel, we looked at Rocky Fork Elementary, and we discussed this about Stewart's Creek Elementary. All right, what do you think about how many can Browns Chapel take? Because they're contiguous, you know, with the other zones. And when we looked at it, and then we looked at these on 1 Mile Lane, we looked at that, and they're already building over on the other side. And what happens then when we rezone, 3 or 4 years down the road, maybe less, we end up having to bring them back again, you know, because of that. So, you know, I agree. I mean, it's one of those things where if it's still in an area that can sustain the growth, in other words, there's land and infrastructure there, they're going to put homes there, you know. I think the only one right now, and I'll agree with Mr. Young, if Las Casas ever gets the infrastructure, heaven forbid, because everybody's going to be moving out that way. But really, Kittrell, in the Kittrell area, Kittrell community, same way, if they, you know, they'll occur. So, yeah, I agree. The growth's going to come, you know, and as we talked about before, when we went back and kind of looked at Blackman Middle Zone and Blackman High School Zone back when they were first built. And, you know, you had to get out into hinterlands to bring people in to fill the thing up. Now it's contracting. And that's the thing. You're right. I mean, it is a difficult task. I want everyone to know that. No one wants to rezone kids, but, you know, sometimes we have to do that. And no one wants to have to build schools, but that's just, you know, the cost of doing business, I guess.
I just don't think we can, along with what Mr. Young was saying. I hear everything, but you're saying, I do not believe we can call this a firm in to come in and help us and do this massive rezoning and do it right without being able to say, we have maximum capacity at all of these schools, and they're all about the same. If we want to be fair to our students and our families and not mess with them 4 or 5 years down the road and do this all again and make sure that if we target this correctly, we're going to have the capacity up at these schools. Whether it looks like right now they need it or not, they're going to need it because we've got to tackle this in the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Let me jump in real quick on that. Okay, one of the things we talked about this, and you guys, I mean, I agree if you want to get a consultant, but let me tell you what a consultant will do. It's just the facts, ma'am. It's about growth and moving students and building and moving students. We take in consideration the challenges that you're going to have, whether it be programs at one school that we don't have at another school. So I will caution you on that. I think this gentleman here, Dr. Sullivan, myself, Mr. Morgan, we do a good job with that. These two right here constantly are bringing plans for new subdivisions and stuff. They have been around here long enough. They understand the school part of it. We understand, you know, as a school board and as a school system, we work with our families. But an outside firm coming in and telling you what we would probably tell you, you know, you may end up having more challenges that way. I'm just throwing that out there. Like I said, it's up to you guys to do that. And probably, Mr. Lee, you'd probably like to have it off your plate. I don't know about you. You kind of like this stuff.
Typically with consultants, it doesn't get off my plate because I end up meeting with them and providing all the information, and Mr. Morgan will be doing the same thing we're already doing. There'll just be an outside person looking at it to see if they see anything differently than what we do.
And that's fine, but through their eyes, though, they will see
Strictly
something.
Numbers.
It's strictly numbers.
They don't necessarily understand our system.
And they'll look at the numbers. And
here's something I would like to say, and maybe I may step out on this limb. Even with everything we're proposing, if this growth continues, in 4 to 5 years, you're still going to need an elementary, a middle, and in year either 4 or 5, we're going to need a high school. And when you build that high school, like it, don't like it, you're going to rezone again. It's coming. Consultant, no consultant. If this growth continues at the rate that we are growing, everything that we're talking about doing here today, the additions to all these high schools, we're buying us 4 years. And then all of them are going to be in the same boat all over again at a 3.5% to 4% growth.
That's a sad fact.
And I hate it. I'm going to be here unless Mr. Spurlock or the next director doesn't want my services. I plan on being here 10 years. I'm going to be dealing with this. I'm not trying to be, sometimes I sound like the gloom and doom guy. But I think you all need to understand this. We're not getting away from building a high school or rezoning for any more than 3 or 4 years, tops.
But I think the longer that we wait to build, it's going to put us really behind the eight ball.
The one
gonna
thing
put
I
us in
want
a
to say
corner.
about option 1 and option 2 and option 3. Option 1 is our most conservative least cost option. And then we looked at option 2, what is going to happen next based on projections that we could actually put off for 1 year. That's really all the difference is between 1 and 2. What do we think? And a consultant's going to tell you the same thing. They're going to look at raw numbers. And believe me, I don't want to move portables. We spend a lot of money and a lot of time and effort and phone calls moving portables. So I'm not getting out of anything. That's our most conservative. I try and look at it like my home bill when I present all these things to Mr. Spurlock for his review. If this was my house, what is the least I can get by with right now? Because inflation's running rampant and all these other things. What is the least I can do? That's what option 1 is the least I can do. And then option 2 is more aggressive. Option 3 is more aggressive than that. If I had additional income and I wanted to attack it earlier, what do I move up? All of these things over the next 2 years or 3 years are going to hit us. We're not getting away from them at all. And you are correct, Mr. Young. This board changes, the county commission changes, and their philosophies changed. We've adapted some of what we do to these additions because that came strictly from the county commissioners. And I'm out on this limb. I'm going to stay on it. You build a new school, I address 3 schools overcrowding for a longer period of time. If I build an annex, I address 1 school only. And by the time I build 3 additions, I've built that new school. And I'm going to be fooling with those additions over the same time period, over the next 3 to 4 years. And I'm not getting away from them. That's the thing. You don't get away from within 4 years of having to build that school. They're Band-Aids. Now, I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. It's a philosophy. And that's the philosophy that the county commission has kind of sent back at us, and that's kind of where, and I'm sorry if I stepped out of line.
I agree with you. It's always, you get more bang for your buck by building a whole new school. You can even see that in your history here, your five-year history. I mean, the biggest bang for our buck was when we built Rockville High School, Rocky Fork Elementary, and we did 1 addition at Oakland Middle School. I mean, yeah, we spent the most money there, but we put more classrooms for a lesser dollar amount than we did by doing some of these other additions. We only spent $90 million there, where we some of these other projects where we only did additions, we spent 50-something million. So,
But the problem is we don't have any land right now to build. That's the problem.
It is, and that's kind of why
we don't have land where we need the schools.
Right, that's correct. And it's the same thing Mr. Spurlock and I have been talking about for 2 years. Stewart's Creek to Rockville. It's that corridor, and that corridor is not going away.
Rockville is Blackman now.
Yes.
Because they have the infrastructure.
That's right.
Yes.
They've got all the roads out there, all this stuff is right in line for them to be your next Blackman. So
yes.
It's taking off.
Stewart's Creek is coming right behind it because they've now got that, they got the water line finished, and that's what was holding Stewart's Creek back for us. And Stewart's Creek is like Rockville. We can't add on to Stewart's Creek High. There's nothing we can do there. I'm sorry, but I mean, that's just.
And we're not unhappy with what you've given us and the work that you've done.
Well, I'm not. I'm trying to give you guys. Y'all are in a position that I don't want to be in.
Yeah.
I'm the information guy. Y'all are the ones who've got to vote.
This is merely a second opinion if we were going to adopt.
Oh, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
And they're going, but that,
They're not
and I
happy
think
with
that's the difference. A lot of times when you go to hiring consultants, they don't truly understand the dynamic of the district, and it is all numbers. And that's fine. It doesn't hurt to have an outside opinion. I'll be glad to work with them.
That's
Doesn't
all
bother
it
me.
is. It's just an opinion.
Yeah.
It's nothing
I'll
that
be
says
glad
that
to
we have
work
to
with them.
follow what they say.
Yeah. I don't have a problem
Think it'd be a
working
good
with
idea?
I mean, that's one of the multiple times I've spoken with TSBA when we have our conventions and we have different training sessions, because we are one of the larger districts, and a lot of the things that they have, unfortunately, does not apply to us.
Right.
And we have, I know probably several of us, Ms. Johnson has spoken with them about having, you know, something specifically for us top 4 or top 5 districts, because our problems are not the same as 98 other counties in this, in the state.
Don't disagree.
I agree. We're not only one of the biggest districts, we are the fastest growing district.
Yeah.
And you know, you add all that together, plus we got another projected million, projecting that by 2035, we're gonna have another million people right in this area. It's just gonna complicate things even more. There's no one building any more schools than we are. And I'm sad that we're building them that fast and as large as we are, because we've gotten to some capacities at these schools and I'm not comfortable with. I was hoping we'd keep our high schools around 2,000.
Yeah.
Agree.
Well, we're getting over 2,000.
Too much.
Our middle
Many.
schools, I was hoping to keep them between 1,500 at the most. We're getting over that now. So it's just not a good situation to be in. And we keep kicking the can down the road. We keep spending the same amount of money that we do year after year, and it's not going to get us anywhere. We're going to find ourselves in a bigger hole. It's going to cost us more money later down the road to get out of it. It's time to just.
I
we've been
agree with
telling them
Mr.
it's
Young.
coming. We've been telling them this is coming for a long time. It's time for us to ask for what we need.
And I've spoken to several county commissioners, and everyone I have spoken to is very enthusiastic about us building additions.
And that's why this proposal has a lot of them.
I agree. I just want to move Blackman High School in the beginning, because that is relief for Rockvale, that is relief for Stewart's Creek, the high school. And Riverdale is relief for Rockvale, which is why we started this whole conversation to begin with. And let me ask another question. You mentioned growth in Las Casas. We have land on the Mathis farm for 2 schools.
Yes, ma'am.
If we grow out there, we've got it.
Well, in year 4, I'm asking for a middle school at Walter Hill, so it's
Good.
It's on
On
the
the
list.
Mathis?
Yes, ma'am, that would be Walter Hill. So
Okay.
year 24 to 26 would be Walter Hill Middle School.
And there's room for high school, right?
Yes,
In
ma'am.
case we-
and That very
Okay.
well could be the high school that comes in 27. There is a high school proposed in year 5, a new
Okay.
high school.
In the 5-year plan
Yes,
that we're
ma'am,
looking at.
yes, ma'am. It
Okay.
is, it's there now, year 5.
Thank you. Any other comments by members of the board? Mr. Lee, I want to thank you and all of the staff, and Mr. Spurlock, I appreciate your comments. I agree with Mr. Young and the rest of this board that we need an aggressive plan. It kind of feels like, you know, I know we need to build a school, we need the classrooms, but we have this we have the land already, so additions, obviously, and that's what you've presented to us. I have visited every school that we're talking about in advance of these meetings for rezoning and the building plan, and I've driven through Ms. Sharp. I had to call her one day and say, hey, where's this properties at? I've done my research and I understand the growth. One of my great concerns is that the growth in Laverne and Nolensville, that's going to impact Stewart's Creek. So we're going to, so I share in your concern.
Effect.
We're going to squish 2 schools that we can't grow, Rockvale and Stewart's Creek, and Blackman has potentially some room. Now, I understand the infrastructure as you went over with the driving, parents driving their students to school, and I understand bus contractors probably are screaming at the TV right now as we talk about this, but I do think that we need to maybe look at moving up an addition to Blackman to relieve some of that pressure, knowing how imminent the building is. Now, I understand that materials are low, but I was on a Saturday, and these people, they were building houses. I mean, the workers were out there, so it's not a matter of if, it's how quick until we can get bodies in those homes. So, and I know you guys know all this. I have some serious concerns about the lack of capacity. I have some deep concerns about the portables, which to me are like wet cardboard boxes for our students. It's a safety issue. So I like the more aggressive plan, and I would like to see, you know, I don't know, I understand the need for the elementary schools as well. Do we have room at Blackman Elementary, and I hate to say this as I just called them cardboard boxes, but do we have room to move portables if we move them out of one to put at Blackman Elementary for a little relief temporarily?
You're talking about add more portables at Blackman Elementary?
Yes. I hate that idea, but I'm asking if it's possible.
It's, the answer, I'm going to give you the answer to your question, yes.
But it's not.
I don't like it,
Okay.
but the answer is yes.
Why don't you like it?
They got
Other
too
than the
many now.
obvious reasons.
It's too many now. If it was a high school
We're talking about
where we
elementary
had,
school. We're talking about elementary school
Yes, sir.
kids too.
That's what I'm saying. If they were high school kids where they were a little more, I hate to say responsible, elementary kids scare me to death.
Okay.
And we have, I spent $25,000 to put a fence around them this year, just because they had trouble. We've got more children with disabilities, and they have runners.
Okay.
You know, they just get away. And so I've spent $25,000, we, to take care of that around those portables. And yes, we can add more portables, but elementary children and portables to me are a bigger concern than high school.
Okay.
That's a personal opinion.
I appreciate your opinion. I do, and I agree with you.
Where's the city school going to build their next elementary, and when? Do we know?
I don't think it's.
They have recently announced an undertaking for rezoning, which leads me to believe they're not planning on building one.
That's right.
Yeah, I knew they just made a trade with Middle Tennessee Electric out there, that property I think that we were looking at, hoping we could get.
Yep.
And I understand that's what they're going to do, is put a school on there, so.
I don't think they're intending on doing it in the next 3 to 4 years. Their intention right now is to rezone all of their schools.
I've had understanding that there will be no more schools built in the city of Murphy.
I've heard
Some other folks.
That's what I understood.
That was through some folks that maybe should know, but that's what I understood. But
I think that will depend on August.
I think the city government would like to be out of the school business. But
I'm sure with these price tags, our county would like to be out of it too.
agree.
So,
If I may, if y'all want to tell me what you want, you know, like if you want to move Blackman up or Oakland up in option 2 or 3 or whatever it is, I can give you a quick number of what the overall impact would be if you don't want to move anything down. Now, if you want to move something down, I'll still try and do it for
You
you.
want to give them some time to kind of, I mean, it's not like we're going to go.
No,
You give them some time to think.
the next health and ed meeting is 3 or 4 weeks away, right? I mean, you could actually vote, it scares me, on February 10th. You wouldn't have to vote today. You could wait and give me some feedback, and I could make a change to what you think you want, and then we could maybe have something on the February 10th agenda to vote.
If it wouldn't upset anyone, I'd like to be copied on that. Okay. I mean, so I will be in a loop, okay?
You get it before it goes anywhere. More to think about.
Are we undecided?
I don't know that we're undecided. I think that, you know, back to the point about rezoning and the potential rezoning is, we've talked at length, it seems like, here today. Is it possible that with a district-wide rezoning, we could see some relief to some of these elementary schools, to these 2 elementary schools?
I really don't. I mean, you're talking about some long traveling. You're crossing over some zone lines with the elementary schools.
And the more that you want to try to tie those different grade bands into each other, like the board has asked to do several times. The more you do that, the harder it is to get those numbers to match inside of that next group.
There are some things we can tweak. There are, but would to significantly lower Stewart's. I've looked at that back in the fall. You look at Browns Chapel. You move some off of 1 Mile Lane, then you got all of that growth from Shelton Farms that we haven't seen materialize as much.
It's coming though.
Then we looked at Rocky Fork Elementary. Got some capacity there. However, if you've been out there lately, I mean, it's growing and they're still building. So what we get into there, and I get it, because when you look at, see, that's where I go back and use Siegel as an example. Siegel, historically, since we did some rezoning that put some kids back over to Oakland, has become stagnant. Whereas these other areas that have capacity right now, it won't take long for those to reach capacity, within a year or two at the most.
Question.
A well-placed subdivision in the middle of Browns Chapel, Stewart's Creek, Rocky Fork, one well-placed 200-home subdivision could mess up anything that we do now.
Right.
For elementary, or it could cause more problems than what it's worth. Browns Chapel wouldn't need that many to force them over the top, and you don't have anything.
I was going to say, Rocky Fork's almost at capacity, Stewart Creek's over, Blackman's over. All the schools that are around it where you've got that little bit of relief at Browns Chapel, they're already over. You can't get enough kids out of them. Browns Chapel doesn't have enough capacity to get enough children out to give you any growth at these other schools. So you're going to rezone twice. It doesn't work.
Question.
And when you're rezoning, you want to look at those established neighborhoods, not those newer neighborhoods. There. By the way, Mr. Reed, Mr. Lee, I was going to ask you about Old Nashville Highway close to Burleson. What are they doing down there?
Another subdivision.
Okay, if you haven't, how many of you have been down that way?
I go down there all the time.
That looks humongous back there.
The one right there on Murfreesboro Road, just as you cross the river, behind where the junkyard used to be.
Is that going to be another subdivision? I was down there
Subdivision.
yesterday.
Yes, sir.
Oh, my
If there's land they're going to build.
Yeah.
Now, the potential for the Walter Hill Middle School, now that will feed into Oakland and Siegel, or would it feed just?
Would probably get Siegel, Oakland, and probably a little bit of Las Casas. That's all.
Middle school, you mean, we're putting a high school out there already?
Siegel and
Oakland.
Oakland, yes,
Yeah.
would be your predominant, because that Siegel zone goes to the river into 840, and there's just not that much out there. You're on 840 this side. The other side of the river goes back towards Smyrna.
Not only that, but that property sits right on 231, basically.
Yes.
And you're going to have to pull from both sides of the highway, and it's rural.
Now, does the Siegel High School zone go to 840 and stop? Don't go over 840?
Well,
I know the middle school does.
it goes just past it to the river.
Okay, so there's not really a lot. Well, isn't there a potential build out that way?
There hasn't been anything come up yet, but there's a few, when they do that Cherry Lane thing, I think it'll come.
Okay.
Ms. Sharp, you had a question?
Yes, and this is just kind of thinking, because Siegel is not at capacity, is there a CTE program? I know we have the drone program, which is very successful and very out-of-the-box thinking. Is there another program that we could put there that would draw some more children and students from another school?
Well, Siegel has aviation, right? Is that what you mean by the drone program?
That's a huge thing.
They have quite a few already good CT.
It would have to be
solid
something
ones.
different that we don't offer. Something.
Right, and that would be my suggestion.
We just maybe share. I mean, I
We
think
don't-
if more people knew.
Sorry, we don't know how many people are going to choose to go to Siegel. because they have room with our new law. So that's something else we need to consider.
Good point.
How many seats, James, did he list? How many seats? Siegel High?
About 80.
Which he's really basing it probably on teacher capacity.
Exactly. So when they were determining those numbers, they used both their building capacity, and also had to balance that with their actual
Teacher capacity.
teacher ratio capacity, because you can't go over that
I
again.
mean, there is much more than 80. I mean, if we had the personnel, there's much more than 80.
Probably at least a couple of hundred total.
I'd say closer to 300.
I'm curious to see over the next couple of years with this new legislation allowing kids to pick up and move if their parents can take them, if there's a spot open, how many take advantage of that?
I want to make sure, I don't mean to interrupt you, Ms. Maxwell, but I want to make sure that, we are talking building plan, we are talking rezoning. We have a building that has the ability to take more students, particularly high school, then I'm sorry we don't have the staff. We need to do a great job of getting staff in there.
I agree.
So we can get kids in those classrooms. Otherwise, I mean, that's a hard sell to go to the county commission and tell them, we need another building or an addition, but by the way, we can't staff this one over here. I mean, so this is a big approach.
We can do that. We can, now, high school is, once again, goes back, it's a different animal. Even if you move a couple hundred out of, let's say, move a couple hundred out of this school, this high school, it doesn't mean that we can move, enough teachers, because they're not all going to be going into 10th grade Algebra 1 or whatever, or Integrated 1. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. But we have done that. Actually, Dr. Sullivan and his group do a great job of looking at enrollment and looking at staffing, and we've moved, Dr. Sullivan, we've moved several over the last few years.
Yeah, traditionally, we have added every 24 students district-wide is what the formula had been in the past for a growth position. The last 3 years, or 2 years, 2.5 years, we've added almost 4,000 kids, and we've only added 30 teaching positions. So we are
moving them around.
Wow.
We've moved them around, but we are at our limit. As you mentioned with Siegel High School, staffing-wise, can hold about 75 more kids, or we're going to, which is fine, we can do with the budget process, but we're going to have to add teaching positions for them.
Right?
There's going to be an operational cost that goes with it, yeah.
How many students are in the drone program, do you know?
If you give me a minute, I can look.
Sure, I know,
So
I'm sorry to put you on the
you've
spot.
got
I
your
know
drone-
it's a two-year program, and it's typically, a junior, senior.
Yeah. And Siegel's got 3 big things. They have their Humanities Academy, they have their drone program, and then they also have aviation.
It's a phenomenal program.
Members of the board, if you could be agreeable, I'd like to take a 5-minute break. Let's digest some of this information, and then let's come back and get prepared for a vote. So let's take 5 minutes.
Bueno, agua, por favor.
No, I mean, we're getting started. I was just kind of breaking you up there a little bit. Sorry about that.
Again? We can patiently wait for you. All right. Let's get back into our meeting. I appreciate the break. So we were on the 5-year building plan. We don't have to vote today, but I think it was the goal of this board to be able to move forward with some of these major issues. So at this time, if there's any board member or anybody who would like to add to the conversation or give some direction if you want to wait, let's go ahead and entertain that. Ms. Maxwell, what option are you on?
Well, I'm actually creating my own. It was option 3.
Okay.
And, sorry.
No, you're fine. Just want to follow along.
Took the elementary schools and just did our high school. Just concentrated year 1 on our high school.
Turn on your mic, Miss Maxwell.
I'm so sorry, Miss Bratton.
Is that better? Okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Looking at option 3 and just kind of tweaking it a bit, moving the elementary schools down to year 2 and adding Blackman High School to that plan, where we're basically doing Riverdale, Smyrna, Laverne, and Blackman High in year 1.
Okay. So you said all the high schools. That does not include Oakland.
I'm sorry, Oakland. I apologize, Oakland.
So then I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. We want to do, and I do think, but I just want to repeat it, just Riverdale High, Smyrna High, Laverne High, Blackman High, and Oakland High additions is what you'd like to see.
Yes.
Okay.
So, any renderings of this Blackman High edition? Do we have anything? Do we know how many classes we're adding, or?
We would propose to add the same amount of classes, but no, there is no rendering because I have not started on that. That came out of the dark. But it would be the same number. It'd be to get around 450 to 500 students, get them up 2,500-ish.
What would that capacity be then?
It'd have to be 2,500 or plus.
It'd be about 2,500 if you added
Yeah, they're
300 seats.
2266, so in that same neighborhood, around 400 students, get it 2,600. I don't want to go any higher than that, personally.
No.
I don't want to go that high, but I definitely don't want to go any higher than that.
All right, as long as we're not going
Mr. Lee?
Yes,
Where
ma'am?
would that be located at Blackman High? Behind?
To be perfectly transparent, it couldn't go behind it, I don't think,
Okay.
unless I split it. And I have not got all the utility drawings and everything together, so it may be actually 2 separate locations, or it could be one
Okay.
in the parking lot. I haven't got all that worked out yet. What I have
Okay.
looked at is, do we have the property? And the answer is yes. But I
Okay,
have not
thank-
figured out how to do it yet.
Thank you.
Was that a motion, Ms. Maxwell?
I guess it kind of was. I'm so sorry.
No?
No, I just didn't.
It was.
For.
So Ms. Maxwell, you just restate your motion, please?
I would like to reconfigure option 3, eliminating the elementary additions at Blackman and Stewart's Creek and adding Blackman High, Oakland High to the existing Riverdale, Smyrna, and Laverne High School additions in year 1. And go with option 3.
Okay. Members of the board, you have a motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Young. there any further
Are we,
conversation?
are we calling this option 3 or option 4?
I think it's its own option, Ms. Bratton.
Okay, what I thought. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments, or concerns before we take roll? Ms. Hopkins, please take the roll.
Ms. Maxwell?
Yes.
Ms. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Estes?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Ms. Sharp?
Yes.
Mr. Holden?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes. Item passes. Next item is, we're going to discuss is district-wide rezoning. We already kind of alluded to this a little bit. And I do want to preface this because I've asked for this and I've explored it. As we begin this conversation, I don't think, and I hope that the staff understands that this is not a reflection of our lack of confidence in your abilities to serve us or to serve our community, but rather our desire as a board, or at least my desire, I'll speak for myself, to bring in a second set of eyes to help us understand. And I realize they're going to look at a lot of the same things. And so I would propose that not only do we look at bringing in a consulting firm, but that we put together a standing committee that would work with this consulting firm to help understand hotspots of growth, as we discussed today, our needs, and really an unbiased approach as we grow, we want to be proactive and not reactive in this posture. So sometimes that's difficult. I know there's a lot of moving parts here, but I would like to entertain an idea of bringing in immediately a firm that would help us with a district-wide rezoning and understanding. You know, I often say maybe it's rainbows and unicorns to think we could have more of a district, Blackman Middle, Blackman Elementary, Blackman High. If you live within a certain radius of those schools, parents might want to know that their kids can continue to go there. And I realize with our growth, we don't have that ability right now. But the goal would be, and maybe we find that out through through hiring a consulting firm, but I'd like to at least explore it as we grow. I think we need some assistance with this issue. So I'm open to any conversation. I have spoken with TSBA. There are a couple firms that they've recommended to us. I'll share that with you in a second. But I would like to know more from my fellow board members. If there's an appetite to do this, please let me know.
I don't have an appetite for another rezoning, but I think it's something that we do have to look at. I think we do have to consider it, so. I don't think any of us wants to rezone, but I do think we need, a second opinion.
Do we know a
I think
cost?
it's a terrific idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Ms. Brady.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
I just said I think it's a terrific idea to call in some outside help. This has almost gotten bigger than we are. I know the Clarksville Montgomery school system has done this, as well as Shelby County. And as long as we have some guidance, perhaps from TSBA, I would like to see this as well as a committee formed to help us look at different aspects of rezoning.
Thank you, Ms. Bratton. Mr. Holden?
What kind of cost are we looking at for doing this?
Not entirely sure. I'm not sure if that cost is going to be predicated on the volume. The companies that, and Ms. Bratton has already mentioned them, but the counties, Shelby County is one county that's a firm that TSBA has worked with. So I'm not entirely sure what that cost will be, but we can explore it with them.
Well, and two, I want us to be careful that we don't burdensome our people with getting all the information together and giving it to these pieces of folks to look at. They need to be more involved in getting their own information and not burdening our people. I don't know what the structure is of consulting, but it needs to be where these guys got plenty to do. They don't need to support a consultant looking at our data. They can look at our data.
Yes.
I'd like to just see what they, kind of have to offer and how they do it.
Okay.
We make sure it's valuable to us.
I agree. Ms. Maxwell?
I agree. Cost is an issue. I want to make sure we do it for the most bang for our buck. But I don't want to overburden our staff. But I also want to be able to, we approve or we can not approve what their recommendations are, so. But I want a company that can do a thorough job without, Tim's right, without overburdening our staff, you know. They can come in and do some cleanup and maybe if they have some questions, but I don't want them having to do a deep dive and have to do all the numbers. I want the consulting firm to be able to look at the numbers and
We'd like to have some references as
Yeah.
well. We could.
Yes, yes. So maybe the next step would be for them to make contact with them and maybe have them come and address us or share what the scope of their work might be, and determine whether it would be something feasible for us to enter into, some kind of an agreement with them.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Absolutely.
So I don't know that we'll vote on that this morning, but I'll follow up with the board on this issue, and I'll make some contact, and we'll present something to the board in the very near future. Okay?
Thank
you. Thank you. Next item.
Request for funding to county commission.
Okay, so that request for the funding, that's tied to our building plan?
Right. What was that total again with these 5? Would that also include additional portables at Blackman Elementary and Stewart's Creek Elementary? Can we put another portable at Stewart's Creek Elementary without putting it in a parking lot?
I think we can maybe get one more at Stewart's Creek Elementary, and I would have to look at Blackman. We may have to look at going to the other side of the building.
Gotcha.
They have property, but we just haven't looked at adding them yet.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes, Ms. Bratton?
I want you all to know that you may lose me. I am on my work iPad and it's down to 4% capacity. So if I disappear, I've got it plugged up.
Thank you for letting us know. We'll move along.
Okay.
So the request for funding then, it's just conversation, for a conversation point, arguably. So a commitment to the commission, or an aggressive lobbying of the commission. Mr. Bodery? I don't know if that's a question for you or not, but.
Can you restate? I'm listening to you, but I just make sure.
So this item on the agenda is a request for funding, or, for the funding to county
127
commission.
million.
That's what, and basically you're asking what does that equate to after we went through the debt capacity study and saw where we're at right now as a county? Basically, like we discussed, you're looking at about, for each million that you're asking for in debt issuance, it breaks down just on a quick and dirty is about $75,000 to debt service $1 million for each $1 million you're going out for. So what you're looking at for that request that was just passed, you're looking at a tax, the equivalent of on the tax levy of just over 10 cents. That's what the request is.
That's on 127 million?
Yes, sir.
137.
Okay. On our current tax levy, that's about a 5% increase.
Thank you.
And that's for just the brick and mortar. That's not staffing, it's anything else.
Right. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on that item? Next item is rezoning for Rockville.
Okay, I think we had, what do you have, 3 here? 2.
Actually, there's only one plan in front of you.
Okay.
And the reason there's only one plan in front of you is we've developed several from what the request from the board has been. I wanted to go over this very last one that is somewhat new. And the reason there's more than one page is one of the questions that has been asked over and over again is, what does that look like downtown? So we'll go over that last just so you can see that page. So the first area that I wanted to highlight was along Franklin Road. And again, we're looking at approximately, under the plan, which would move all freshmen and give all rising 10th through 12th grade the ability to grandfather into their current school, or it would allow them to go to their new school of zone. Along Franklin Road, you have 3 areas that we've looked at in the past for several different plans. It amounts to 108 students moving that first year. That freshman class is around 108 students. It may be, of course, a little more or a little less, depending on what it looks like in the fall. As time progresses, when you phase in those other 3 grade levels, as you know, they move up, you're looking at anywhere between 100 to 110 students per year that will follow them until that area is completely dissolved by Blackman High School. The areas 1, 2, and 3 that we have been talking about removing from Rockvale as well, that are adjacent to Church Street, are that first year we're looking at approximately 65 students in the freshman class. For every year that goes beyond that, you're looking at somewhere between 85 and 90. We do know that this is a very hot growing, quick growing area. That number can be expected to go up just a little bit, but I wouldn't say any more at its peak after 3 years of build out. I wouldn't say you could probably add 20 to 30 to that last 2 years as quickly as that area is building. So whereas you'd be looking at 65 this year, somewhere between 85 and 90 the next year, you may be looking at somewhere between 90 and 100 the next 2 years until it's completely done. So, John, the next page, please. So we're going to look at the next page, which is specifically downtown. And what we looked at, we've looked at several different configurations. What we've kind of come down to with this last option that was guided by the board, we left 4A alone. It stays at Rockvale High School. 4B, 5, and 6A would be moved from Rockvale into Riverdale High School. And there are no students in 6B, as we've talked about before. This is a commercial area. It's basically a throughway, and it kind of neatens everything up as opposed to having a little jagged tail sticking out there. Between 4B, 5, and 6A, that freshman class is 17 students right now. So after that is all said and done, after the 3.5 to 4 years has gone by, you're looking at somewhere a total number coming from those basically 2 zones or 2 areas we've identified. You're looking at about 60 students all in all. It is built; those areas are built out. Anything in this little area that we're talking about, all of that is built out. The only thing that they could do to increase that is to remove buildings and build new ones, apartment complexes or multifamily tracts, something of that nature. And then the last piece that we talked about was 6B, and we're looking at 11 students in their freshman class. They would be brought up to the Siegel zone. It definitely puts all 4 of these areas in much closer proximity to the nearest high school. Or a much nearer high school. And at the end of that process, we're looking at a total of somewhere between 35 and 40 students that would be going to Blackman from going to Siegel from just that area.
Mr. Morgan, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate those numbers, thank you. If we were to move, if all of 4B, 5, and 6A, if everybody decided to not grandfather and go, what's the total impact of those students to their new rezoned school, total number of students?
If it were today, it would be 66 students.
And then the same, can you give me the same information for 13, 14, and 15? If today, in today's numbers, if all went?
Sure, so 13, 14, and 15, that would be 230, in between 230 and 240.
Thank you. And then let's, for consistency, 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3, you're looking at 432.
Wow. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Questions, comments, concerns, members of the board?
Well, thank you, Mr. Morgan. That's to me, a much better division, especially in the downtown area.
I do believe that this map is exactly what we asked Mr. Morgan to do, and I mean, it's not easy no matter what we do, but I do think this is the best map.
On a motion?
Any other conversation, concerns? I appreciate all the work you've done. I know this has been a long process to all the staff. Mr. Spurlock, I appreciate your work on this. If there's no further conversation or questions, comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion we approve option 2I, version 2.
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Estes and Ms. Bratton. So to be clear, version 2 would, we have first a motion and a second. It would rezone in these areas, rising ninth graders only, and allow grandfathering for 10th, 11th, and 12th. Is that the understanding of the board?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Hopkins, would you please take the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes. Okay. I would like to thank everybody for being here and for giving up your Saturday morning. We do appreciate you. We appreciate the staff and all the hard work that you've done. Ms. Hopkins, thank you for putting breakfast together for board members. Mr. Spurlock, thank you for all the work that you've done. And members of the staff, thank you so much. We're indebted to you. There is no further business. Everybody enjoy your Saturday. We are adjourned.